The 42nd floor of the Whitmore Tower did not receive visitors without appointments. It had its own elevator bank, keyed to a biometric panel that remembered your fingerprint before it remembered your name. The carpet up here was the color of old slate, dark, dense, the kind that absorbed footsteps rather than announced them. The air carried a faint scent of leather and circulated air, temperature controlled to 68 degrees year-round, regardless of what the season was doing 42 floors below. The lobby assistant, a young woman named Priscilla, had worked this floor for 3 years and had never once seen someone arrive unannounced. Until today, he came up on the service elevator. That much she knew because the access log flagged it afterward. He was wearing a gray button-down shirt that had been ironed but was beginning to separate at the collar, dark trousers with a crease that had held up through a long morning, and shoes that had been resoled at least once. He was carrying a leather messenger bag that was more worn than old, the kind of worn that meant it had been used every single day. He looked to be in his mid-30s, though there was something about the set of his jaw and the stillness of his eyes that made him seem older. He told Priscilla his name was David Calloway. He said he was there for the board meeting. Priscilla told him, as gently as she could manage, that the board meeting was a closed session for directors and senior executives only. David said he understood. He said he was not there as a director. He was there as the person who built the system they were about to discuss. Priscilla asked him to wait. She called downstairs. Then upstairs. She called Gerald Hart, the company's general counsel, who happened to be standing in the hallway outside the boardroom with a cup of coffee, preparing to walk in. She heard him go quiet for a moment. Then she heard him say, with measured calm, "Send him in." She would think about that pause for a long time afterward. The boardroom was not a room designed for intimacy. It ran nearly 60 feet from the tall windows at its north end to the credenza and projection wall at its south. The table seated 22 and was currently occupied by 16, the core of the Whitmore Family Trust. 3 independent directors, 2 outside counsel, the CFO, and the COO. There was a whiteboard on one side of the room with a timeline drawn in blue marker. There were printed briefing packets at each seat. There were bottles of still water and one of sparkling and a tray of pastries that no one had touched. They looked up when David walked in. He did not hurry. He did not hesitate. He walked to the far end of the table, the presenter's end, the end where people stood when they had something to show, and he set his bag down on the floor beside the chair. He did not sit. He looked at the room the way a man looks at a place he once knew well and has returned to after a long absence, not with longing and not with bitterness, but with a kind of precise recognition. The COO, a man named Randall Forsyth, was the first to speak. "You have got to be kidding me," he said. No one laughed, but several people shifted in their chairs, and that was close enough. Claire Whitmore, who sat at the head of the table and was 36 years old and had been the chief executive officer of the Whitmore Group for 4 years, watched David without expression. "Mr. Calloway," she said. Her voice was even. She was good at even. "This is a closed session." "I'm aware," David said. "You were not invited." "No," he agreed. "I was not." "Then you understand why I'm going to have to ask you to." "I understand a lot of things," David said. "I understand that you're about to vote on whether to settle the Meridian claim. I understand that your position is that the data loss in 2011 was a result of a vendor hardware failure and not an internal decision. I understand that your outside counsel has advised you that the statute of limitations makes any challenge difficult." He paused. "I also understand that you're wrong." The room went quiet in a way that rooms only go quiet when the wrong thing has been said by the wrong person in the wrong place. "And everyone knows it, but no one knows quite what to do next," Randall said. "Security." David reached into his messenger bag. Several people tensed. He pulled out a USB drive, small, black, unremarkable, and placed it on the table. The sound it made was almost nothing, a soft click, like a single key being pressed on a keyboard in an empty room. "If I'm wrong," David said, "I'll leave and never come back. If I'm right, you'll want to hear what's on this." He looked at Claire. She looked at the USB drive. Then she looked at Gerald Hart, who had just come through the door. Gerald was 61, had practiced corporate law for 30 years, and had the kind of face that was constitutionally incapable of showing alarm. He looked at the drive. He looked at David. He gave Claire a small, almost imperceptible nod. Claire said, "Sit down, Mr. Calloway." 12 years earlier, David Calloway had been 26 years old and 6 months into the best job of his life. He had been hired as a data systems architect for the Whitmore Group's subsidiary division, a mid-sized logistics and asset management company called Meridian Infrastructure Partners. His role was to build the backbone, the data storage, retrieval, and verification systems that would allow Meridian to track billions of dollars in infrastructure assets across 9 states. It was meticulous work. It required someone who was comfortable with silence, with detail, with sitting alone in front of screens for hours, verifying that the architecture behaved exactly the way it was supposed to behave. David was very comfortable with silence. He had grown up quiet. His father had been a civil engineer who worked long hours and communicated in nods and short sentences. His mother had taught elementary school and had the gift of explaining complicated things simply. He had inherited both qualities, the patience of the engineer and the clarity of the teacher. He had studied computer science at State University on a partial scholarship, graduated near the top of his cohort, and worked 2 smaller jobs before landing at Meridian. He had been there 6 months when he found the first anomaly. It was a small thing. A discrepancy in an asset depreciation log, a record that should have reflected a write-down in value, instead showed an artificial inflation. Not dramatic, not even necessarily suspicious if you saw it in isolation. But David did not see things in isolation. He saw patterns. He saw the way one number related to every other number around it. And he saw that this number did not belong. He documented it and flagged it to his immediate supervisor, a man named Thomas Brace, who thanked him and told him he'd look into it. 3 weeks later, David found 17 more. He built a small secondary log on his personal work partition, a shadow record, running quietly alongside the main system, capturing discrepancies as they occurred, and timestamping them with cryptographic markers that could not be altered retroactively. He did it not as an act of rebellion, but as an act of professional habit. He was an architect. He built things that were structurally sound. A building with cracks that you documented was safer than a building with cracks that you ignored. He filed a formal internal report in February of 2012. He received a response from HR, acknowledging receipt. Nothing else happened for 6 weeks. Then Thomas Brace called him into a small conference room and told him, with visible discomfort, that the anomalies he had flagged had been reviewed by the finance team and determined to be within acceptable reporting variance. He was thanked for his diligence. He was told the matter was closed. David asked for the review documentation. He was told it was an internal process and not available. He asked who had conducted the review. He was told that information was also internal. He went back to his desk and, that afternoon, found 17 new discrepancies. The months that followed were the worst of his professional life and, in other ways, the beginning of the worst period of his personal one. His wife, Margot, who had been 3 months pregnant when he started at Meridian and was now 8 months along, noticed that he was sleeping badly, eating irregularly, spending long hours at his laptop after dinner. She asked him what was wrong. He told her the truth. He had found something at work that didn't add up, and he wasn't sure what to do about it. Margot had been a paralegal. She knew what not sure what to do about it usually meant when the thing you had found involved money and powerful people. "Document everything," she said. "I am," he said. "Then trust yourself," she said. Their daughter was born in late October of 2012. They named her Emma. She was small and loud, and entirely herself from the first moment, and for a few weeks, David let himself believe that the anomalies at work and the quiet walls of the company's indifference were someone else's problem. Then, in December, he was called into the office of the Meridian division head, a man named Franklin Forsyth, Randall's older brother, and told that his position was being eliminated as part of a departmental restructuring. He was given 2 weeks severance and asked to return his equipment by the end of the day. His access to the Meridian systems was revoked that afternoon. What Franklin Forsythe did not know, what no one at the Whitmore Group knew, was that David had spent the previous 4 months building something into the system architecture that could not be reached from the outside. A backup node, a shadow archive, encrypted, distributed across 3 redundant servers, triggered to compile and seal itself automatically if its creator's access was ever revoked. He had built it the way he built everything, quietly, carefully, and very well. When his badge stopped working at 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday in December, a file began assembling itself in the dark. He drove home. Margot was nursing Emma in the living room. He sat down next to them on the couch and said, "I lost my job today." Margot looked at him for a long time. "Did you do the right thing?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Then we'll figure out the rest," she said. They did not get much time to figure it out. Margot was diagnosed with an aggressive form of ovarian cancer the following spring. She fought it for 14 months, with the particular tenacity of someone who had unfinished business in the world. She died on a Tuesday morning in May, 3 weeks before Emma's 2nd birthday, in a hospital room with yellow curtains and a view of a parking structure. David sat with her until the room became something different than what it had been. Then he went home to their daughter, and he did not stop. 10 years after the parking structure and the yellow curtains, David and Emma lived in a 2-bedroom house on a residential street in a part of the city that real estate listings described as transitional, which was a polite word for affordable. The house had a small front porch where Emma had built a bird feeder out of a plastic bottle and a wooden spoon, and a kitchen with slightly uneven flooring, and a refrigerator that hummed a note and a half flat. David worked as a freelance data consultant, the kind of work that came in irregular intervals and paid decently when it came, and required rigorous budgeting when it didn't. He was good at budgeting. He was good at most practical things. He had become, over the years, the kind of father who knew how to braid hair and which brands of cold medicine actually worked and how to fix a leaking pipe joint without calling a plumber. He had learned these things not because they came naturally but because they were needed, and he was the one who was there. Emma was 8 now. She had her mother's dark eyes and David's capacity for silence, and she had developed, entirely on her own, an intense interest in how things worked. Not just machines, though she was interested in machines. She was interested in systems. Why did the birds always arrive at the feeder in the same order? Why did the line at the grocery store always move the way it did? Why did the same road sometimes take 8 minutes and sometimes take 23? She asked David these questions at dinner, at bedtime, on the walk to school. He answered them seriously, the way his mother had answered his questions, as though the question itself deserved respect regardless of who had asked it. One evening in early October, Emma found him at the kitchen table with the messenger bag open and the old hard drive sitting on the table like a piece of evidence. She stood in the doorway in her pajamas, the ones with the small foxes on them, and looked at it. "Is that the thing from before?" she asked. He looked up. "What do you know about the thing from before?" "You look at it sometimes," she said. "When you think I'm asleep." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Come sit down." She sat across from him at the table, the way she sat when they were doing math homework together. He told her in terms an 8-year-old could understand, which was harder than it sounded, that a long time ago, before she was born, he had worked for a company that had done something wrong. He had tried to tell people about it. They hadn't listened. And then they had fired him so that the wrong thing could keep being wrong without anyone pointing at it. Emma looked at the hard drive. "Is the proof on there?" she asked. "Some of it," he said. "The rest is somewhere else. Are you going to use it?" He looked at her. She was looking at him with the complete, undefended attention that children bring to questions they believe matter, and the look made something in his chest compress. "I don't know yet," he said. Emma considered this. "If you know something is wrong," she said, "and you have proof, and you don't do anything, doesn't that make you part of it?" He did not answer right away. He looked at the hard drive. He looked at her. "Go brush your teeth," he said. She went. But she had said it, and it was in the room now, and it stayed there long after the light in her bedroom went out. 3 weeks after that kitchen table conversation, the Meridian Infrastructure Partners case reappeared in the news, not prominently, but enough. A financial journalist had filed a records request that surfaced a regulatory inquiry from 2012 that had been quietly shelved. The inquiry had been shelved because the company's legal team had argued insufficient evidence at the time, and the regulator had accepted the argument. The Whitmore Group's stock price dipped slightly. Then, the Meridian Homeowners Association, representing dozens of families who had been affected by a botched infrastructure assessment tied to faulty asset data from the period in question, filed a renewed civil claim. David read the article 3 times. Then he made some phone calls. He arrived at the 42nd floor 6 days later, sitting in the boardroom now. After the USB drive had been placed on the table and the room had gone through its various degrees of silence, David watched Claire Whitmore and waited. She had been studying him since he sat down. He had been studied by people in positions of power before it was a particular kind of attention, a calibration, an assessment of what category of problem you represented. He had learned not to perform for it. He sat with his hands in his lap and his back straight and his face quiet. "Mr. Calloway," Claire said, "let me be direct with you. I'd appreciate that," he said. "This company investigated the 2012 reporting period thoroughly in 2014. The findings were reviewed by 2 independent accounting firms. The conclusion was that the anomalies were within acceptable variance and that no systemic fraud occurred. That conclusion has been reviewed twice since then and has not changed." She paused. "If you have information that you believe is relevant, the appropriate channel is the regulatory body, not this room." "I tried the regulatory body in 2013, David said. "I was told there was insufficient evidence. Then perhaps the evidence was insufficient. The evidence existed. It was deleted." He looked at her steadily. "By someone in this building." Randall Forsyth, the COO, made a sound that was not quite a laugh. He was a broad man in his early 60s, with a quality of occupying more space than his chair provided. He had the face of someone who had spent decades being right in rooms like this one, and had come to regard the condition as permanent. "That's a serious allegation," he said, "from a man who was terminated for cause." David turned to look at him. Just looked. "I was terminated in a departmental restructuring," David said. "That was the documentation. I still have it." Gerald Hart, the general counsel, cleared his throat. "Mr. Calloway, what exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing that you look at what's on that drive," David said. He nodded toward the USB. 15 minutes. If it's nothing, I leave. If it's something, we talk about next steps. And if we decline?" David looked at the table. He picked up the USB drive and held it for a moment. Not threateningly, just held it. "Then this goes to the journalist who filed the records request," he said. "And to the plaintiff's counsel in the Meridian case. And to the regulatory office." Along with an explanation of why the 2013 inquiry was premature. He set the drive back down. "I don't want that. It would be messy for everyone. But I didn't come here to negotiate. I came here to give you the chance to hear this from me first." The room was very still. Claire looked at Gerald. Gerald looked at the drive. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Claire said, 15 minutes. The AV setup was managed by a Whitmore IT coordinator named Benji, who was 24 and had never been in a board meeting before and was trying very hard not to let that be visible. He plugged the USB into the presentation system port with slightly steadier hands than he felt and opened the directory when prompted by Gerald. One folder appeared on the screen. Archive, 12Y. Protected. The folder had a timestamp. The 14th of December 2012. 4:49 p.m. 2 minutes after David's access to the Meridian system had been revoked. "It was set to compile and seal on a kill trigger," David said. He said it simply. "The way you explain the obvious to people who need the obvious," explained. "When my credentials were revoked, the backup node finished its assembly and encrypted itself. The archive was distributed across 3 external redundant nodes under a separate identity layer. No one at the company knew it existed." "That's not," Randall started. "It's not in violation of anything," Gerald said quietly. "The data originated from systems he had authorized access to. The backup methodology, was within the scope of his role. Randall closed his mouth. David nodded to Benji. Benji opened the first subfolder. The contents were listed in clean, simple columns. File names. Dates. File sizes. There were 2,847 files. The first section, David said, is email correspondence. The screen filled with a chain of internal emails. The header information was intact. Names, timestamps, server routing data, everything. The first email was dated the 3rd of March 2012. It was from David Calloway to Thomas Brace, marked with a formal subject line. Meridian Asset Log Discrepancy Report. Q4 2011. Q1 2012. Formal review requested. The email was 4 paragraphs. It was measured and professional and specific. It identified 17 separate discrepancies, provided the asset codes, the expected values, the recorded values, and the percentage of variance. It included a request for formal documentation of any prior review. Beneath it was Thomas Brace's reply, dated the same day. Acknowledged. Will follow up. Below that was a chain from 4 days later, between Thomas Brace and a name no one in the room was expecting to see. The name was Franklin Forsyth, Randall Forsyth's brother, the man who had fired David, the man who had been Chief Operating Officer of Meridian Infrastructure Partners. Benji scrolled slowly. The room was completely silent. Not the polite silence of people waiting for a meeting to begin. The particular silence of people who have stopped performing attention and are actually paying it. Franklin Forsyth's reply to Thomas Brace was 7 words long. Handle this quietly. Do not escalate further. Thomas Brace's response was 4. Understood. It'll be managed. The room absorbed this. No one spoke. David said, next section. The screen shifted to a set of system logs. These were dense columns of data, action codes, timestamps, user identifiers. To most people in the room, they would have looked like noise, but Gerald Hart leaned forward slightly, and one of the independent directors, a woman named Dr. Patricia Elwood, who had a background in forensic accounting, put on her reading glasses and looked at the screen very carefully. Can you walk us through what we're looking at? Gerald said. These are the deletion logs, David said, from the Meridian Data Management System, June through September of 2012. Every time a file was deleted, the system recorded the action, the user ID, the timestamp, the file identifier, and the file's last known checksum. He paused. What you're looking at is 4,300 records from that period. Files deleted from the primary reporting database. They correspond precisely to the asset records that showed the highest degree of variance, Dr. Elwood said, without looking away from the screen. Who authorized those deletions? The deletion commands were executed under 2 user accounts, David said. One belongs to a systems administrator, who left the company in 2013. The other, he nodded to the screen, belongs to the account of the Meridian CFO at the time. The name on the screen was Harris Kimball. Several people in the room looked at Randall Forsyth. Randall's face had not changed in expression, but the quality of his stillness had altered it, had gone from the stillness of authority to the stillness of something that has been caught in a very bright light. Claire Whitmore said, "Is Harris Kimball still with the company?" Gerald answered. "He retired in 2019. He has a consulting arrangement." Claire looked at the screen. Her jaw was set. She had a way of doing that, of receiving information that was inconvenient without allowing her face to announce the inconvenience. David had watched people like her before. They were good at the surface. The question was always what happened beneath it. "Continue," she said. The third section was video. David had not told them about the video. It was not the kind of video that organizations expected to have preserved. No formal recording, no server, captured board feed. It was a recording from a laptop camera, running in the background of what appeared to be a working meeting. The angle was low and slightly skewed, pointing up at the faces of the people sitting across a conference table. The resolution was not excellent. The audio was clear enough. The date stamp said the 9th of November 2012. The voices were Franklin Forsyth's and Harris Kimball's. They were talking. in the calm and organized way of executives who have already made their decision and are managing the logistics of having made it, about what would need to be done before the year-end reporting cycle. The language was careful, the kind of careful that people use when they know what they are doing is not defensible, but believe they will never be asked to defend it. Phrases like, clean up the Q3 discrepancy file, and we need the variance reports consolidated before the external review, and, most quietly and most clearly, in Franklin Forsyth's voice, the Callaway report needs to disappear. All of it. If it surfaces during the external audit, we have a problem we can't contain. Harris Kimball's response, with the muffled sound of a pen clicking. I'll handle it before the end of the week. The video ran for another 40 seconds. Nobody spoke. When it ended, the screen returned to the file directory. The room sounded like it was holding its breath. Claire Whitmore's hands were flat on the table. She was looking at the screen, but David could see that she was not looking at the screen. She was somewhere else, doing something internal and necessary. He recognized the look. He had done the same thing in a hospital parking garage, once, when a doctor had come out to talk to him. The work of receiving a truth you were not ready for looks the same, regardless of what the truth is. Randall Forsyth stood up. He did it with the practiced authority of a man who had never left a room he hadn't chosen to leave. He was 62 years old and had been COO of the Whitmore Group for 11 years, and before that had spent 20 years in adjacent roles within the family trust. He stood up straight and looked at the room, and when he spoke, his voice had the quality of a door being closed firmly. This is fabricated, he said. David looked at him, just looked. The metadata is forged, Randall continued. The video has been altered. This is a sophisticated manipulation by someone who has spent 12 years with a grievance and apparently the technical skill to construct a convincing fake. The cryptographic signatures on every file in the archive can be verified against the original server checksums, David said. I can provide the verification keys. Any independent forensic analyst can confirm authenticity within 48 hours. Then we'll have our forensic analysts. Your analysts, David said, work for the Whitmore Group. The word hung there. Nobody filled the space after it. Dr. Elwood said, he's right. If this goes to forensic verification, it needs to be through independent counsel. She looked at Claire. That's a standard protocol. Randall looked at his niece. There was something in the look, not a request, exactly, more like a reminder of something old and established and assumed. Claire did not look back at him. She was looking at the screen, where the file directory was still visible. The numbers were still there. The names were still there. Franklin Forsyth's voice was still there, in the air of the room, even though the video was finished. She said, sit down, Randall. He did not sit down. Claire, please sit down. The quiet in the room had a texture now. It was not the quiet of nothing happening. It was the quiet of something very large, turning slowly, like a ship changing course slow, and then suddenly, absolute. Randall sat down. Claire looked at Gerald Hart. What are our obligations under current discovery rules if this material is authenticated? Gerald spoke carefully. If authenticated, this material would constitute material evidence in the Meridian civil claim. It would also potentially constitute evidence of obstruction of the 2013 regulatory inquiry, which has a separate statute question. He paused. And it would require immediate disclosure to the plaintiff's counsel. And if we don't disclose, then we are in a significantly worse position than the one we're in now. Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she said, get Dr. Elwood's recommendation for an independent forensic firm. I want the verification process started by end of week. She looked at David. Mr. Callaway, is there anything else on that drive? He held her gaze. Yes, he said. What followed was not a confrontation in the way confrontations are usually imagined. There was no shouting. No dramatic accusation across the table. No moment where someone broke down and confessed in the full emotional manner of people who confess in movies. What happened instead was quieter and more relentless. The methodical presentation of data, 30 minutes becoming 45, 45 becoming 2 hours, and the room slowly reorganizing itself around a new set of facts. The fourth subfolder contained the original asset discrepancy reports the full documentation of the variance David had identified, in the form he had filed it, with the timestamps intact. It showed not 17 discrepancies but, by the end of the period David had been able to observe before his access was revoked, 112. The total value of the inflated asset reporting across those records amounted to roughly $340 million in overstated infrastructure value across 3 major projects. The fifth subfolder contained communications between Harris Kimball and a third party, an external auditing consultant who had been paid through a subsidiary to produce a shadow review that blessed the original numbers. The consultant's name was in the files. His firm no longer existed. The sixth subfolder was the one that made Gerald Hart remove his glasses and set them on the table and press his hands together in front of his face. It contained communications from December of 2012, the week David was fired, including an internal memo recommending his termination, written by Franklin Forsyth, citing failure to follow internal reporting protocol and insubordinate behavior toward supervisory direction. The memo had been countersigned by the head of HR. Beneath the memo was a draft of the termination letter. Beneath the termination letter was a short email from Franklin Forsyth to the same HR head, written the evening before David was called into the office. Make sure the Callaway file is clean on our end before this is processed. I don't want anything coming back to bite us, Dr. Elwood said, very quietly. There it is, Gerald agreed. He sounded tired. Claire Whitmore had not moved in a long time. Her hands were still flat on the table. She had the look of someone doing mathematics in their head, not simple mathematics, but the kind that involved rebalancing every assumption that had formed the structure of what they believed was true. She looked at Randall. Randall was looking at the table. Did you know? She said. His jaw worked. He said nothing for a moment. Then, I knew Franklin was managing it. That's not what I asked. The room waited. Randall said, I knew there were concerns about the reporting methodology. I was told they were being handled. By handled, Claire said. Did you understand that to mean the concerns were being investigated? Or that the concerns were being buried? He looked up at her. There was something in his face that might have been, in another man, in another circumstance. Something like shame. It passed quickly. I trusted my brother's judgment, he said. Claire looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned away. She looked at David. He was sitting with his hands in his lap, the messenger bag at his feet, the USB drive on the table in front of him. He looked exactly as he had looked when he walked in, the same stillness, the same patience, the same quality of a man who has been waiting a very long time for something and is in no hurry now that it has arrived. She said, What do you want, Mr. Callaway? He had thought about this question for 10 years. Not constantly, he had learned, because he'd had to learn. The discipline of not carrying things that you cannot yet do anything about. But in the moments between things, in the early mornings before Emma woke up, and the late nights after she was asleep, he had returned to it. What would he say, if he ever got the chance to say anything? He had gone through versions. There had been a version that was angry. There had been a version that was cold and exacting. There had been a version, in the dark of the year after Margot died, that was barely coherent, just grief, wearing the costume of justice. What remained, after all of that, was something simpler. He said, I want my name restored. He meant it specifically. His name removed from the termination record and replaced with an accurate account of why his employment ended. His contributions to the Meridian data architecture acknowledged in the company's internal history. The formal record corrected. The second thing, he said, is a whistleblower protection policy. Real policy. Not a statement in a handbook. An independent ombudsman, a documented reporting channel, and mandatory legal protection for employees who file internal reports in good faith. Claire nodded slightly. She was listening. Third, David said, is a restitution fund for the Meridian homeowners. The families who were affected by the bad infrastructure assessments. Their properties were devalued. Their projects were delayed. Some of them took on debt based on assessments that were wrong. They should be made whole. One of the independent directors said, That's potentially a significant. I know what it costs, David said. He looked at the director without hostility. I know because I spent a long time calculating it. He stopped. Claire was waiting. Everyone was waiting. He said, "That's it." The room held this for a moment. There was a quality to the silence now that had not been there before, something that was almost discomfort in reverse. The feeling of a space that had expected one thing and received something else. Gerald said, carefully, "There's no financial claim? No personal damages? I had a job," David said. "I lost it. I found other work. I didn't lose my house. My daughter is healthy." He paused. "What I lost was my name in the record. That's what I want back." He picked up the USB drive and held it, not as a threat, just as the thing that it was a small container of truth that had waited in the dark for 12 years. He held it out to Claire. "You can have this," he said. "I have copies. But you should have this one." She took it. She looked at it in her hand. She closed her fingers around it. Then she looked at Randall, who was still looking at the table. "I need you to leave the building," she said to him. "Today, HR will be in contact with a transition plan." Randall looked up. His mouth opened. "Please don't," she said, not unkindly, just with the finality of someone who has made a decision and is not going to unmake it. He left. The room breathed. It took 7 months. The forensic verification came back in 11 days, confirming the authenticity of every file in the archive. The independent forensic firm was one that Patricia Elwood recommended. She had used them in a prior board matter and trusted their methodology. Their report was 43 pages and contained no ambiguous language. The Meridian civil claim was settled 2 months after that. The settlement amount was not made public. But the terms included a full acknowledgement of the data irregularities and a structured disbursement to the affected homeowners that was overseen by an independent administrator. David was asked to provide an expert declaration for the settlement process. He did, without billing for his time. The regulatory inquiry was reopened by the relevant state office. Harris Kimball, through his attorneys, entered into a cooperation agreement. Franklin Forsyth, who had been living in retirement in a coastal town in the Carolinas, retained his own counsel. The process was ongoing. David did not follow it closely. The Whitmore Group's internal record was corrected in month 4. David received a certified letter confirming the change. He read it twice, set it on the kitchen table, and made Emma pancakes for dinner because it was a Thursday, and Thursday was always a good day to have pancakes. Emma asked why they were having pancakes. He told her it was because something had been fixed. She said, "The thing from before?" He said, "Yes." She thought about this, chewing, and then she said, "How do you feel?" He considered the question seriously, the way he always considered her questions. "Lighter," he said, "I think." She nodded as though this was a satisfying answer, and picked up her fork. The whistleblower policy was implemented in month 6. It was drafted with the help of an independent labor attorney, reviewed by 2 employee advocacy organizations, and made available to all Whitmore Group subsidiaries. David was not involved in drafting it. He had made his request, and the execution was theirs, but he heard about it through a brief email from Gerald Hart, who noted that it had passed the board unanimously and added one sentence at the end: "Your request was not unreasonable. It should have been the standard practice from the beginning." David read the email at his kitchen table on a Sunday morning, with coffee going cold at his elbow and Emma still asleep down the hall. He read it once, and then closed his laptop and sat for a while in the particular silence of a Sunday morning in a small house on a quiet street, with a bird feeder on the porch and a refrigerator humming a note and a half flat. Claire Whitmore called his phone on a Thursday in May, 7 months after the board meeting. She said she would like to buy him a cup of coffee if he was willing. No agenda. Just coffee. He said he was willing. They met at a place in the neighborhood. He had chosen a small coffee shop on a corner. Nothing notable about it, tables a little too close together, and music a little too loud, and very good pastries in a case by the register. He got there first and ordered a black coffee and sat at a table near the window. She came in without an entourage. She was wearing a dark coat, and her hair was slightly different than it had been at the board meeting. less composed perhaps. She looked like a person rather than a position, and he recognized the difference because he had been watching it happen across 7 months of public statements and regulatory filings, and the slow, incremental work of an institution being made to reckon with itself. She ordered tea. She sat down. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Outside the window, the street was doing the ordinary things streets do in May. People walking dogs, a delivery van double-parked, 2 children arguing about something at the top of their voices in the middle of the sidewalk. "I want to apologize," Claire said. "You don't have to. Not for my family's actions," she said. "I had nothing to do with those. I was in college when it happened." She looked at him. "I want to apologize for the room, for the way they looked at you when you walked in." She paused. "I looked at you that way too." For about 4 minutes, he picked up his coffee. 4 minutes isn't long," he said. "It was long enough," she said. He set the cup down. He looked at her. She was looking at him with something direct and serious in her face. Not guilt, exactly, but the particular form of attention that people give when they are trying to see something they missed before. "How did you know," she said, "that this was the moment? That now was when to come forward?" He thought about Emma at the kitchen table in the fox pajamas. He thought about a question asked with complete undefended attention by someone 8 years old who had not yet learned to be careful with the truth. "Someone I trust told me that knowing something is wrong and having proof and doing nothing makes you part of it," he said. Claire was quiet for a moment. "That's," she started. "How old is Emma now?" He looked slightly surprised that she knew the name. 8, he said. Claire nodded. She wrapped her hands around her tea and looked out the window at the street. "That's a very clear way to see things," she said. "She's 8, he said. "She doesn't know yet that it's supposed to be complicated." They sat for a while after that, not saying much. And the coffee shop did what coffee shops do around people who are finding their way to the next thing. He walked home through the spring afternoon, the light doing what light does in May when it angles low and makes everything look slightly more significant than it is. His shadow went long ahead of him. A dog on a porch watched him pass. The bird feeder was full when he got home. Emma had refilled it before school. He stood on the porch for a moment, looking at the street. The ordinary, unremarkable street with its modest houses and its sidewalks with the uneven seams and the old oak at the corner that someone had planted 50 years ago without knowing it would be this large. He thought about Margot. He thought about her the way he always thought about her, not as grief exactly, not anymore, but as a presence that had moved from the foreground to somewhere peripheral. Always there, not always heavy. "Trust yourself," she had said. He had. And then, he had also trusted Emma. And he had also trusted that the truth, if it was actual truth, and not just a story told in anger, would hold its shape over time, would remain itself. He went inside. He set his bag down by the door. On the kitchen table, where he had left it, was a piece of paper. Emma had left it before school. He recognized the folded corner, the small post-it note stuck to the front that said, "Don't look until tonight." He had waited all day. He unfolded it. It was a drawing. Emma drew the way she did everything with total seriousness and her own private vocabulary of shapes. He had learned to read her drawings the way you learn to read a handwriting that is unlike any other. In the drawing, there was a large room. The room had tall windows and a long table and many people sitting around it. At the far end of the table, alone, was a figure with a small bag beside him. The people around the table were not looking at phones or at papers or out the windows. They were looking at the figure at the end of the table, all of them. Every face turned in the same direction. At the top of the page, in Emma's writing, which mixed capitals and lowercase in no consistent pattern, they listened. He folded the paper carefully. He set it back on the table. He stood in the kitchen for a while, with the refrigerator humming its flat note and the late afternoon light coming through the window over the sink, and he felt not triumph, which was too large and too noisy for what this was, but something quieter. The particular piece of a thing completed, of a weight set down after a long carrying. The truth does not need to shout. It only needs to last. He put the kettle on and waited for his daughter to come home.